Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So last time we looked at Christopher Booker's first basic plot, which was overcoming the monster, and what that entailed in terms of a hero battling against some form of evil, whether that is an external force, a being of some kind, an alien, a human, or internal to his or herself. We didn't discuss the story structure that falls into, according to Booker. Now, according to Christopher Booker in his 7 basic plots, now remember that I have put all of the links for any books that I'm referring to down below, so be sure to follow those links if you want to get a deeper insight into these particular screenwriters and teachers' works, including Robert McKee, which I cited last time as well, and I'll be talking about today. So according to Christopher Booker, the 7 basic plots, and in particular the Overcoming the Monster first basic plot, falls into 5 distinct stages. So we'll be looking at how he categorizes those stages in terms of the story and what parts of the story fall into the different stages. But before we do that, I want us just to look briefly at how traditionally stories have been divided into 3 to 5 parts. So you may be familiar with story arcs, and I'm going to look at some diagrams with you just to illustrate how those story structures look according to playwrights and novelists and story writers over the ages. So let's look at those diagrams now. So when we're looking at story structure, we can start by looking at the traditional story arc, which you may have seen previously. So traditionally, story arcs are made up of an exposition or an introduction where characters are introduced and the background and context is made known to the readers or to the audience before we have an inciting incident or something that happens that gets the action moving, at which point greater obstacles are introduced to the main characters in the rising action, and as tension rises you can see the graph goes up in Gustav Freytag's pyramid. Gustav Freytag was a German playwright of the 19th century, and he devised this kind of triangular structure. So in the rising action we have more complications being introduced. So after the inciting incident we may have a complication or a crisis before the peak point of tension within the novel or the play or the film occurs at the point of climax. And then we have what's called the falling action, where loose ends are tied up, some minor obstacles are overcome, and then finally we have the the resolution and the denouement, so the end of the plot. So Gustav Freytag's pyramid is the first image of story structure that we're looking at. It does give a rather misleading indication of when the climax might occur, because it suggests that it's in the middle of the plot when in fact it doesn't always occur there. But it's a pretty useful story structure, and it's one that is perhaps traditionally known to lots of people. So you have the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the denouement. So this is Gustav Freytag's pyramid. That traditional story arc from Gustav Freytag has been over time modified and changed by various screenwriters, and one example is Sid Field. Again, I'll provide links for any of his books in the description below this video. So Sid Field came up with what is called a story paradigm, and you can see it here. In its image or structure, you can see it's quite similar in shape to the pyramid of Gustav Freytag, except that it probably shows a more realistic image of where you might see the climax in the timescale of a novel or a play or a film. So this is made up of 3 acts. Act 1 is the setup, Act 2 is the confrontation, and Act 3 is the resolution. So that is similar to the exposition, the rising action, and the falling action in Gustav Freytag's pyramid. You have an inciting incident in the same way as you do in Gustav Freytag's pyramid. You have a plot point 1, which introduces additional obstacles in the kind of upward trajectory of the graph. And you have a midpoint in Act 2, a plot point 2 before the peak moment of the climax, and then the falling down in the resolution. So Sydfield's story paradigm is another story arc which can be used when plotting a novel or a play. The last diagram we're going to look at is Robert McKee's central plot and his linear timeline in terms of action within a screenplay. So similar to the two other diagrams we've looked at, you will recognize an inciting incident, the idea of some kind of complication, what he terms as progressive complications in like the rising action of Gustav Freytag, or in the confrontation stage of Sydfield's paradigm. You also have the crisis, the climax, and the resolution. And similar to Sydfield's paradigm, we have the 3-act structure. All of this is background to you now understanding the structure that Christopher Booker assigns to the overcoming the monster plot. So we're going to go back to that and then come back to the diagrams and see how Christopher Booker's structure for overcoming the monster fits into one of these. Now that you have some insight into the way in which stories have traditionally been divided into between 3 and 5 parts, and you understand the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution, traditionally seen in the story arc structure, we can talk a little bit more now about Christopher Booker's overcoming the monster story structure, which he states is made up of 5 distinct stages. Okay, the first stage he describes as the anticipation and call to action stage, and that is where the hero is called to action. He might be reluctant to take that action, but he's called to action after there's the initial setup with the characters finding out and the audience finding out about events that are occurring. So in the case of Star Wars, we have the intergalactic war that's going on, and Luke Skywalker is introduced, and he's called to action because Princess Leia has been taken. Then you have what is described as the dream stage, where the hero is presented as someone who can overcome the monster and who is preparing for battle. And in the case of Star Wars, we've got Luke Skywalker. He's presented with his father's lightsaber. He's preparing for battle. And we're introduced to Han Solo as well. So that's really where we see the dream stage. And then we move on to what Christopher Booker describes as the frustration stage. And you might liken that to the rising action in the traditional story arc, where we have complications that are introduced and things start to appear, start to get more difficult for the hero. And it seems that his adversary is greater than he thought, and we are left questioning whether the monster can actually be overcome. So in the case of Star Wars, you might say that that is where we see the battle with between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi, where Obi-Wan Kenobi is killed. Okay, and then we move on to the nightmare stage, where things appear to be hopeless. So it's the peak moment in the plot. It's the kind of climax, if you like, before we move then finally to the miraculous escape and the resolution. So those are the 5 stages according to Christopher Booker: the anticipation stage and call to action, the dream stage, the frustration stage, the nightmare stage, and then the miraculous escape. Those are the 5 stages for the overcoming the monster plot. So if we look back now at the diagrams, we can see where those might fall in the traditional story arc. So let's look back at Sid Field's story paradigm and consider the way in which Christopher Booker's Overcoming the Monster 5-stage plot structure would fit into this. Anticipation stage with call to action is similar to the inciting incident in Act 1. The dream stage is plot point 1, so that both anticipation stage and dream stage fall into Act 1. Frustration stage, where the hero starts to see the monster as being an adversary that may not be overcome, is the confrontation section of the plot. And then you have the nightmare stage, the peak point of the story plot, the climax. And then the miraculous escape is the final endpoint, the resolution. So you can see the way in which Christopher Booker's 5-stage story structure for Overcoming the Monster fits into the traditional story arc. So now that you have an idea about the story structure for Overcoming the Monster, perhaps you can use it yourself in your own writing. Let me know how you get on. And tune in next time. Make sure that you subscribe. Tune in next time when we'll be moving on to look at plot number 2 according to Christopher Booker.